who and what FPYC who and what FPYC is, because for a lot of people, this is their first time joining an FPYC event. So PT will talk about that. And then we will have a brief presentation from the Light from Lebanon CEO, Nathalie Rozot, who our fundraiser or like all the funds that we have acquired during this month, it will all go to this organization. And then Preeti will introduce our lovely speakers and the panel will get started. I'd like everyone to please keep your questions at the end, as the panel will be open for discussion at the end. Thank you.
All right, and with that, I will be talking a little bit about what FPYC is. So FPYC is a 501c3 nonprofit based in the United States, but we have members from all over the world. FPYC was started to bridge the gap between politicians and teenagers and experts in their field by talking about international topics that are pertinent. For example, we have done webinars as well. This is one of them. And our first webinar was with Professor Anthony Arend in September. And he talked a little bit about international institutions and the foundation of that. And that was sort of a precursor to all of the webinars we will be having. The different teams in FPYC that have worked on this event, we have the events team, the fundraising team, who has done a fantastic job all month for generating funds for this event, the marketing team, who has been promoting this event relentlessly, and the outreach team for giving us any advice needed. So thank you to those teams for being such a great support in this foundation of the event. So that is all for me about FPYC a little bit. I'll introduce the CEO of Light from Lebanon, Nathalie, who will give us a brief presentation about what Light from Lebanon is and what they do. So take it away, Nathalie.
Well, thank you, Preeti. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but I hope that's correct. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. This was really exciting for us to get a message from you and to see your interest in what we are doing. I didn't know about your organization. I'm quite blown away by what you guys are doing. I think you're the future. It's really great to see all of your bright faces on the screen. So before I get into what Light for Lebanon is, let me explain to you a little bit who I am. I do light as a professional, meaning that I've worked as a designer in many different design fields like architecture, urban planning, landscape architecture. And a little over 20 years ago, I discovered lighting. So I started working in what is called architectural lighting. And basically what you do in architectural lighting is you light anything from interior spaces of buildings to exterior buildings to public spaces. And I've always been very interested in public spaces. So that's what I've been doing for about 20 years. And about 10 years ago, I launched a non-for-profit FhoScope, which is a think tank on light, where I wanted to experiment and to explore another way of working with light. And a lot of my work is focused on using solar-powered lighting. As I'm sure you all know, wherever there is electricity, that electricity can be powered by a number of different sources, and renewable energy seems like a sensible source. And what is fascinating about lighting is that you don't need to have electrical grids in order to have lighting. You can actually have standalone lighting products. So even when you don't have electricity, you can have light. I worked as a volunteer in Haiti, started working there in 2013. And we were working with the local non-for-profit whose mission is to bring first-class culture to people who live in informal settlements and populations that are largely underserved. That organization is called FPYC. And when the year I volunteered, one of the questions was, there was an electrification program for the informal settlements. And that was using conventional electrical grid. The electrical grid in Haiti has the same kind of problems that the electrical grid has in Lebanon, which means it's very unreliable, very unstable, and the whole system, as if the technical problems weren't enough, is also suffering from a lot of corruption throughout the people who handle the system. So it's basically not a good situation. And so my first action was really to convince both the non-for-profit, but also the residents that we were serving, whom I call our clients, that we could do lighting quickly and at a fairly low cost. And then they could work on a longer sustainable solution for the electrification of the informal settlements. So in that work, I developed a matrix that basically uses 3 levels of light. There's a very small light lantern. I wish I had a sample with me to show you, but it's a little portable light that people can have at home. And then there is some medium systems that can be used like to light pathways, or they like small projectors. And then there is the pole-mounted lights, the street lights that can be used either in very large streets, but also in public spaces. It's very important to light public spaces because one of the fundamental ideas behind doing lighting when you don't have electricity is that light is about life after dark. And that's really one of the motors for Light Reach. So based on that system that I had used and developed in Haiti, we launched a global initiative, Light Reach, to basically apply the model throughout the world to serve communities with light, and also to engage, to provide a infrastructure for the lighting community, which is not very socially engaged. I wish they were as engaged as you all are. But basically, we wanted to make it easy, right? Because some people had come to me, what can I do to help you? And I realized what I need to do is to make it easy for people to also do this work and to get engaged. So we set up a whole infrastructure. So whomever wants to volunteer with us, we put them on the project, we handle all the logistics, and we basically make it easy. So we launched with Light Reach with a pilot program in Puerto Rico. A former student of mine was originally from Puerto Rico. She was practicing in the United States, but after the hurricane, she was really interested in helping communities, and Puerto Rico was one of those places where using solar light made a lot of sense. The program that we launched in Puerto Rico was called Recreo de Noche. So I don't know if there's any Spanish speaking among you, but it basically means playing at night. And the idea was to light playgrounds, to bring solar light to playgrounds, because not only kids or youth can hang out and play at night, but if you have a space like this in a place where it's dark after 6, it also becomes a community space, right? The parents can hang out, the grandparents can hang out, everybody can basically, it's a multi-generational public space, communal space. So we did 3 pilot projects in Puerto Rico, and then it was 2020, and we had to stop everything because it was not safe. We do workshops with communities. We also explain, we teach people about light. I mean, light is wonderful because it's both science and art. So it's a great pedagogical support. And I think for us, it's really important to entice people to be creative with light. There's a lot of things that people can do, either collectively, if there is some kind of festival, people can decorate and can accessorize the lighting public space, but also kids from any age can play with their own light, or I mean, imagine people like you who would want to do a little performance, and you can't really do that if you don't have light. So you can also learn how to manipulate your own light and put some, optics, so it makes you look really good while you're doing your performance. So we had fundraisers lined up. We had to stop that because we couldn't send people. I mean, first of all, we could no longer do the fundraisers. They were planned in New York, where I'm based. And we couldn't send volunteers, we couldn't work with the communities, so that was put on hold. And then in September last year, another former student of mine, I should say that I've been teaching also lighting in a graduate program at the New School University in New York, which has a graduate program in lighting. So another former student of mine, Manal, reached out. I thought Manal was still in California, but it turns out that she had moved back to Lebanon shortly before, not only the pandemic, but the explosion that occurred in August 2020. So Manal was interested in doing something with solar light, and she remembered that I was working with solar lighting. So we basically partnered to launch a new program called Light for Lebanon. And basically using the model that Lightreach had, and adapting it, because it was in the middle of the pandemic, so it's Manal alone over there. We can't really send volunteers to work with her. She hasn't really been able to do workshops with communities, but at least we knew what kind of products would be helpful for the local community. And we also could facilitate all the supply chain and have the products sent to her directly. So we worked with a couple of people from the diaspora who are also based in the States, who are from our industry, and we fundraised slowly but surely. And we've raised in a little over a year now about $100,000, and that allowed us to buy 4,000 lighting fixtures. So as you can see, we're really ambitious. We want to in order to provide solar lighting to all the people, all the communities in the affected area, we estimate that we need four times that. So we're shooting for about 20,000 products total. There's a pretty simple ratio, which is we buy, and it's the ratio has to do the economics. I mean, I'm simplifying a bit, but it gives you a sense of scale. A street light will cost 10 times more than the projectors. And a projector costs 10 times more than the portable lights. So clearly we can, the portable lights are the most affordable. We've already distributed thousands of those to people who are isolated at home and who don't have any lighting. Typically, those are products that we also really like to work with, to do workshops in schools, and then the schools can have the resource and can distribute the portable lights if the community needs them. So we'll get to that down the road. We've also installed hundreds of floodlights, the projectors, because it's dark, people don't feel safe going in their building or walking out of their building. So we've installed some of those, but we also are very keen on supporting people's, as I said, not just play, but also social life and cultural life. So we also worked with organizations that were doing outdoor events. For instance, there's an organization that is looking to restore a whole area that by the river that has been polluted. So they're working to decontaminate it, and there's a large ecological renovation program there. So we put solar lights for the week that they were holding the events. We provided solar lights. There's a group of students from, so I think it's collaboration between an NGO in Beirut and students in Scandinavia who were working on mobile playgrounds. So the idea is really cute. It's basically you take one parking spot and you make a small playground, something, like a little place where kids can play. And we fitted that with solar lights. They've just done a prototype, and the idea is to create a bunch more of those. So I am, that's pretty much in a gist what we've done. We've also installed solar lights in a street that was kind of a pilot project that we did in partnership with Live Love Beirut. Manal on the ground has been very keen on using, and that's a very strong element of our model, which is partnerships. We work with people who already have ties with communities, and we work with people who are already engaged in renovation efforts. So, for instance, we have some of the projects that are coming up. We are looking to renovate a park, a public park. We are going to do more streets. We are looking to collaborate with some schools so that we can light their playgrounds. Because again, it's, if there's a public space that can be used after dark with lighting, we should definitely support that. So in a gist, and to conclude, I just want to say that our model is not, we know that we are not solving the energy crisis problem, but the way we see it is the energy crisis is a very large problem. The lack of light is a large part of it, but the lack of light is something that we can actually address fast and at low cost. And each of our programs demonstrates it. So I didn't have time to actually do a slide presentation for you guys because we found your message a little too late, but I really encourage you to go to our website, Lightreach, and there you can surf through the programs. We update the Light for Lebanon program, and also we are active on Instagram. You can look for LightReachNet and Light for Leb. Light for Leb being specifically the Light for Lebanon. So let me know if anything that I spoke about wasn't clear, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Also, any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Such an inspiring speech. Also, for all the socials, don't worry, we will be sending out at the end a list of resources for everyone to check out. So stay tuned for that. Claudia, would you like to start?
Hello, everyone. My name is Claudia Nichega, and I'm the co-director of events at FPYC. And I'm super excited to be here today and to be able to organize this event with our amazing speakers. So to introduce them, we have our moderator, Gheed El Bizri and Gheed El Bizri, FPYC's two very own. Gheed is a member of the Outreach and the Events Department, and Gheed's a member of the International Department at FPYC. Gheed is also currently based in Beirut, and Gheed is studying at Stanford University, currently focusing on psychology and human rights. She contributes to the Stanford Daily for the podcast team, and she's a member of the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. Now we have Tiffany Saade. She's studying political science, international relations, and human rights. And she's also currently working on many projects involving security, focusing in the Middle East. And she's done a lot of work with Lebanon, and she's a very prominent student activist. And lastly, we have Luna Safwaan, a Lebanese freelance journalist currently based in Istanbul. Her past work has covered ISIS and the refugee crisis emanating from it, as well as Syrian revolution and a variety of different topics concerning Lebanon, including the Lebanon energy crisis, which we're gathered here today to discuss. And she's also an award recipient for the Samir Kassir Award for Freedom of the Press, which she received in 2013. And we are so glad to have her here and all of our other esteemed speakers. So I will pass it off to Ghia so we can hear from our panel.
Okay, so we will start. First of all, I'd like to say that we will start off with some basics because there has been a lot of misinformation about how the energy crisis started. Some people, for them, all they know about Beirut or Lebanon is the explosion, and so they might think the two are directly correlated, which they're not really. So I'd like to start off with Luna. Could you start by explaining what initially caused the fuel scarcity in this crisis in depth and what are the main causes that triggered it, besides the Beirut explosion, because this is not really like a main factor?
Of course. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here and for having me, for being patient with me, because it's been quite a move, leaving Lebanon, moving to another country. So it's been a bit crazy, but I'm very happy to be able to be here and to be able to discuss this topic. So yes, the fuel crisis and the energy crisis in Lebanon. Now, if someone is looking at it from an outsider point of view, you might think and hear about this happening only recently, like this is something that overshadowed the news and that recently started. Where did it come from? How come that it just got worse all of a sudden? Reality is that this has been in the happening for years. So in Lebanon, we don't have strategized thinking. We only think, if you want, bi-weekly or by a monthly kind of planning. When it comes to economy, when it comes to energy, when it comes to anything in the country, there's no long-term planning. We have a very popular strategy in Lebanon that is called the subsidies, or subsidizing some material. Now, the aim of this subsidy or the subsidy system is for the government to support its citizen by lowering the cost of certain goods. These goods are primarily for Lebanon: wheat, medicine, fuel, all types of fuel. Now, of course, Lebanon has been in ups and downs crisis for years. We don't have this strategic thinking. We also count a lot on international loans. Imagine that a country that is not producing economically, even though, by the way, we have so much to produce. We can produce a variety of material. We have the means, we have the weather, the environment, we have the people. So we have the creativity. We have one of the best educational systems in the Middle East, but we don't produce. So we count on international aid, on international loans. So the country is receiving money, but is not investing in creating or co-creating something for its economy, for the economy to be stable and to be long-lasting. We kept recycling solutions in Lebanon. We kept taking international aid or international loans, international donations. The subsidies were not systematically and strategically planned, because what happened is that if you look at the Lebanese scene, the government, in addition to political parties, also used the subsidies for their own good. So you'd think that, the fuel crisis is something that is happening because Lebanon doesn't have a planning system or sustainable planning system, or doesn't use renewable energy. When in fact, the government was using these subsidies to cover up for certain political parties that used the fuel that is subsidized and supported by the government, which is our fuel. It's the people's fuel, in which we are supposed to, which we are supposed to buy at a fair daily rate. It goes up and down sometimes, but it was fine. It was Lebanese coming through. The prices were not always the problem. Sometimes you would have taxi drivers complaining about the prices, but it was never that bad. It never got to a point where it was that bad until the loans became too big. Lebanon was not able to produce, was not able to pay back for its loans from international countries, neighboring countries, and until the smuggling of the fuel on the Lebanese borders got worse. The government is supporting this fuel. They get this fuel with vessels owners or private businessmen, or even smugglers who are connected to local political parties in Lebanon, take this fuel that is supposed to be subsidized by the people, and they go and they sell it in Syria on the borders, and they make profits out of it. So the Lebanese government is losing money to cover these subsidies, and the people are not getting the fuel. The fuel is going to Syria, which is a sanctioned country, which cannot get all of the amount of fuel and goods that it needs internationally, because there's no way that the ports that are opened in Syria and that are controlled by the Syrian regime and by Russia, there's no way that they can get through these ports what they need, especially with the constant international drones and the attacks that have been happening, and the targeting of some shipments in Syria. Some of them had guns, some of them had fuels. So it's a very complex security situation for Syria. So Syria needs Lebanon. Lebanon is making use of that. It's taking these subsidized goods, which is mainly the fuel, and they are smuggling it to Syria. And of course, we're not smuggling everything to Syria, but we have importers who decided to also hide medicine in their warehouses, who decided to use this as an opportunity to make more profit for themselves. So this became a chain of Lebanon year after year having a gap in its economy, but covering it up with unsubstantial solutions, without addressing the main problem. Is that economically Lebanon only buys from the international community, from the neighboring countries, only imports, but we don't export, we don't produce anything. So this is the bigger picture if you want to look at it from this perspective. In addition to that, one last thing that is important to note is that in order to have fuel, you need to have good facilities. You need to have power plants that are, I'm not going to go to the perfect, I will leave my perfectionist side, or the perfectionist side of my brain that believes in renewable energy all the way, because I'm someone who's pro-environment, who's been with Greenpeace since I was 16, working on environment in Lebanon. So I will shut this part of my brain down and go with the flow as they do in Lebanon. Even our power plants are lacking the minimal updates or the minimal electronic updates that allows them to work properly. So you have power plants breaking every now and then. Even when we have fuel, we have a power shortage in the country because some power plant broke or something happened. And now it got too expensive to be fixed with the dollar crisis, because everything has to be purchased in USD and not in Lebanese lira. So this is in brief how I see that the crisis started progressively and got to this point.
Thank you, Luna, for talking briefly about all the sectors. We will go into depth with them throughout the panel, like the education part, the foreign aid. So basically everything Luna said reflects primarily on everyone residing in Lebanon. So I'd like to ask Gheed, since she's also pursuing interests in human rights. I know you can name thousands, but again, not everyone here is familiar with what's happening in Lebanon. So I'd like you to talk about what are the most fundamental rights that the Lebanese are deprived of right now?
Yes, of course. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be speaking at this event. So the situation in Lebanon, it actually made me even more interested in studying human rights because we are deprived of the most basic intrinsic human rights. Our main worries are rights that should be guaranteed and are guaranteed in countries all around the world. So people wake up scared that they won't have enough food to feed their children. They won't have enough medication. They won't even find medication in their local pharmacies. And if they did, then the prices would be like crazy high. So even like the right to purchase medication, to purchase food at a reasonable price is not there. And you know, the Lebanese people are basically deprived of the right to live. Young people don't know how to have dreams anymore. They don't know how to have hope anymore. They don't know how to look forward to something that, you know, because like everything has been stolen away from them. And even education that is supposed to be one of the most basic rights isn't even like easily accessible. So for example, right now, public schools are still closed. And other schools that are open can't afford to have in-person classes anymore or like all the time because, you know, they want to save electricity. And online classes aren't even better because the internet connection is never really good. And the worst part of it all is that the government is absent. The government gives, you know, empty promises with no concrete implementation of the plans. And the government does not feel the pain of the people. They don't know how to have empathy. And the people are just thinking of, you know, they're on survival mode. It's just how they're just like their main worry is how to make it out alive. So when $1 is now equal to 20,000 Lebanese pounds, that means that like an average person needs at least 20 million Lebanese pounds a month in order to survive. But the minimum wage is only 1 million, which is really crazy because we are fighting for the bare minimum. And at this point, you know, it's like, it's just really hard like to think of any solution because all the sectors are currently paralyzed. And yeah, and the government should have had like much clearer plans of how to handle the situation before it develops and becomes too convoluted.
Yeah, definitely. So, continuing Gheed's thought process about how the government really doesn't feel the pain of the people, we will be tackling it from a more someone who's specialized in this. I know Tiffany is a political science major. She has been serving as a member of the judicial affairs, and she is familiar with cases of the criminal process. So I'd like to touch her opinion on this. Do you think there is in any way a realistic way to hold our government accountable, or the political parties who are responsible for this accountable?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. First, I want to say that in general, talking about Lebanon is a necessity and this should not be a trend. So I'm really happy to be spreading the word with all of you. So first, I think when you talk about crime in Lebanon, you cannot limit it to the Beirut blast because you have the crimes of the civil war, you have the crimes of the early 2000s, and you have the crimes that happened, of course, due to government negligence of the civil war, which we do not still have answers on. I think when you speak about crime in Lebanon, there's also implicit crime that does not involve blood. There's the crime of food deprivation. There's a crime of inflation. There's a crime of not having basic equal rights, which Gheed was talking about, of having a limited education. There's a crime of mishandling COVID. But now if you want to talk about how to hold political parties accountable, I think this should start first and foremost by having a united population that believes in the Lebanese identity rather than believes in the factions and the political parties and the ethnicities they belong to. I think that one of the ways the revolution could have worked in holding accountable the political parties is that if all the members in the revolution were standing up together for a unified Lebanon, for a unified future, for a fight that they believe in, rather than to fulfill the underlying political agendas of these parties. We can look, I think, at two solutions, in my humble opinion. If you want to look at the international criminal courts that would get involved in granting justice for the Lebanese people, I think that this could be a feasible but complicated process, in my opinion, because we need to look at the extent to which international involvement in a domestic crisis would be feasible. I would say domestic and regional, because as we know, Lebanon is a political puzzle on all fronts, and you have different regional actors and different international actors ever since the French mandate that are involved in the country. So we need to see the extent to which international criminal courts would have good leverage to help the Lebanese people and to speak for the people rather than to speak for the powerful actors that are involved in Lebanon. If we're looking right now at the investigations happening for the Beirut blast, which for context has happened more over than a year ago, we look at a very late timeline of what the Lebanese people should know, because we almost died. Our houses got destroyed. The people are still suffering from PTSD, from the loss of their families, from the destruction of their homes. And we are held with no answer. We are not only left in the dark because of a lack of electricity, because of power cuts. We are left in the dark because we do not have an answer on why we almost died and why on an afternoon of August 4th, we almost lost our lives and we saw people losing their lives. So bridging a meaning on what it means to lose our Lebanese people, all of us should be in the fight with a head judge, Tariq Bitar, to seek for justice and accountability. I would like to talk about this in a non-politicized way, but we should all be thinking, why is it that every time that Judge Bitar tries to move a step forward into the investigation, we have some casualties, some political tension that arises in the country? I think that we cannot assume right now from the top of our heads without any proof what actually happened during the blast. But I think looking at precedents of sectarianism, corruption, and nepotism, and a huge impact of corruption on the Lebanese status quo, we can realize that we know who the stakeholders are in the game. And these are the same stakeholders that are not permitting us Lebanese people to know what really happened to our lives. So I think in the conclusion, there's no right way, maybe to not an only right way to seek for justice when it comes to criminal crimes that plague an entire country. I think the first step to do that is to change our mentalities as Lebanese people and to think about what unites us, which is the Lebanese identity, rather than what divides us. And this is where we will start in our fight for accountability. Because if each one of us has a different belief, has a different agenda to fulfill for a different political party, then we will never be able to hold them accountable for their actions and to implement transparency in Lebanon.
Thank you, Tiffany. Luna, can you just please, because I don't want anyone to feel that they don't understand, can you please talk a bit about who Judge Bitar is, who are the stakeholders that Tiffany was just talking about, in case someone's not familiar, who are these, and how does this relate to Lebanon's corruption? Why are there people who are not with him? Why are people not supporting? He's a judge, he's supposed to be defending our human rights. So yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna pick up from where Tiffany left off because I think that she wrapped it up perfectly. The problem that we have in Lebanon, in addition to not feeling that we can maybe produce a common a common ideology or a common view to how our country should be, there's also the problem of not understanding politics. I mean, you cannot possibly get rid of political parties. The basis to having a political sector in a country is to have different political parties. But the way that they use it in Lebanon is a kind of like, you know how the mafioso work, like the mafia around the world. It's like they protect one another in one country. One goes down, the other gang members gang up and try to push this person forward and to protect them because they're protecting them. It's like this is how they are working. They are protecting one another in this country. And if you look back at the history of Lebanese political parties, we don't have new political parties. There are political parties that started emerging after October 19th, after October 17th, 2019. But if you look back at the years of the civil war leading up to the 2000, there were no new political parties in the country. You had to take one of two sides, either you're March 8th or you're March 14th. And these two entities have been at a political war over the table with one another. But from what I've seen, from the way they're all now ganging up against Judge Bitar, whom I will talk about now, they're playing a different game from under the table. And it became clearer this year, or in this era, but it had been for a few years now, because we've seen them fight, cripple the country for months, and then get back on the same table together to get ministries and to get positions and to get their people in and to elect a president that they all elected, by the way, and now half of them are not happy with the result, but they were responsible. So Judge Bitar is a judge, he works in the judiciary. He has been handling sensitive cases for years, but like everything in Lebanon, the judiciary is politicized. The judiciary is not independent. Any judge or any lawyer who dares to actually step outside of this box and to demand something new will be accused of either, causing sectarian tension or not following the sensitive procedures that a judiciary usually has to follow. And these things, they just, they appear in the most sensitive times. If you look at the Lebanese law, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty much straightforward. But these little tips and tricks, they just appear whenever a political party wants to cripple the judiciary. We have seen this in cases that are simpler than the Beirut blast. We have seen this in a case I'm not sure if it was 2016 or around that time. There was a homicide. There was a murder that happened in Beirut, in the middle of the street, in the middle of the day. A man lost his temper and went and stabbed a man in the head, in the neck, and killed him. It was caught on camera. Now, the killer is politically affiliated. So it took months to get him to trial. It took months for journalists to be able to track him down and to make sure that he's in Rumye, in the prison, doing a life sentence. This is one little example. So Judge Bitar is known to be one of the very few judges who are decent, transparent, hardworking. He was chosen for this case for a reason, because he knows his work, because all of the judges that were to take this case before him were denied the case or were moved aside for different reasons. The main reason, in my opinion, why there was a Judge Safwaan, there were different people who were supposed to be taking on this position. The reason was to delay. Every politician kept saying, and the judiciary kept saying that, this judge is too close to the case. This judge's sister is married to someone who's a politician, and there's a conflict of interest. They kept delaying until they found a judge who's Judge Bitar, who literally has nothing on him. He's someone decent and he knows his work, and he started summoning politicians and ex-ministers to investigation. And that is when things went out of hand, especially when he started getting closer to the elephant in the room, or to Hezbollah and Amal parties, who are two of the strongest parties in Lebanon. One of them is armed in the streets and acts as a militia, which is the Amal movement. So whenever there's dirty work that is need to be done, they send out Amal movement or Amal party. And Hezbollah, who's portrayed as the resistance party defending Lebanon on the Lebanese borders against Israel, against ISIS, against aliens, you name it. I mean, there's always an enemy, you know, to defend Lebanon against at this point, even though Lebanon has nothing to offer, sadly. So these two political parties are the main actors who have been trying to cripple Judge Bitar's work. Of course, let's not forget that the Future Movement, the Lebanese forces, the Free Patriotic Movement, Al-Marada Party are not at all, are not at all just following up with the investigation and nodding their heads. No, they have also been questioning the investigation, but they have been doing it. They haven't been doing it in the street. They did not go to the street and protest against this judge. You also have another type of politicians, like the ex-Minister of Interior, Nouhad al-Mashnou, who's also in his own way is dreaming of becoming a prime minister, the next Lebanese prime minister, who's also on the list of accusations because he knew that the ammonium nitrate was in the port. And he's also trying to cripple Judge Bitar's work by filing complaints against him, getting him suspended from the investigation, delaying the probe, and all of these things, because he has something to, there's something for him in that delay. So this is why when I say that they're acting as a mafia or a mafioso, and I wrote about this before, it's because suddenly, even though they are not in complete agreement, suddenly they gang up and they start protecting one another when the judiciary or when the Lebanese are so close to finding out answers about what happened on August 4th, 2020.
Thank you so much. I know for people hearing about this for the first time, it's a lot to absorb. It's a lot to understand. It's something very complex. But this is just how much talking about Lebanon is important, really. And we are so grateful for FPYC for really taking the time to talk about this topic. So I'd like to go back to education, because as Gheed said, it's a very important and fundamental right. Lebanon has always been known as having education of one of its strongest pillars. We really have one of the best education systems in the country, in the region. So Gheed, I'd like you to talk about you're a freshman in Stanford. Before coming to Stanford, you spent your senior year here in Lebanon, and despite all obstacles, the fuel crisis, the government did not cancel your official exams. So I'd like you to talk about how the lack of fuel and electricity impacted you and your peers, both physically and emotionally.
Yes, so during that time, students and parents were all living in distress because our entire future depended on these exams. If we go to university, where do we go to university? It depended on our results. And a lot of students, and me included, couldn't study properly because there was no electricity. And we had to literally light up a candle, like in the old days, in order to see and to study. And it was also like so hot all the time because there's no electricity. We couldn't turn on the AC, and we had to study like in the heat all day long, which was truly, very stressful. It was very overwhelming. And, we were like sweating the whole time trying to digest information that we think is not that important right now. But and parents were also very worried because what if they couldn't give their children a ride to the exam centers because there was no more fuel in the gas stations? And, that was like a constant worry, especially when, we live far away from these exam centers. And, the number of COVID-19 cases was rising exponentially. So it would be really easy to get infected in such an environment. And all of these factors just came together to create a very stressful environment for all of us. And it was really hard to study when you think of, all of these factors. And it was, hard for us as well as for parents and even, educators, because, would the teachers even correct our exams? Would they correct our papers? Would they be given the, get paid a fair amount? Would they get paid well in dollars and Lebanese pounds? Would they decide to go on a strike again? Because that already happened in 2014 when students went to the exam centers and they did their exams, and the teachers decided not to correct them. So yeah, all these questions: would we be able to make it to the center? Would we be able to score well or enough? And what can we do in the case where our papers does not get corrected? What do we do in the case where we can't get into the exam center? We had to think of all these different scenarios, and we had to live in constant worry until like August. Why we should have just enjoyed our summer instead, because like everyone, for example, like here at Stanford, like even international students, they began their summer like really early on, and we just had to like study all the time, and it was a really stressful environment.
Yeah, and as someone who is still in Lebanon and who's still in my last year of high school, I can sadly confirm that the situation is still the same. And it's like everything Gheed said is still the same for this year, even though it's getting worse. Last year was online. This year we're going in person, which for some people thought that that's a good thing, but actually everyone's so worried about providing fuel to go to school every day. Teachers are most literally spending their salaries just to get to be able to come to school and provide us with a decent education. So this was how the crisis impacted us students. Luna, I'd like to talk about how did this impact your line of work? I know you're based in Beirut. You came back here in 2019 to really cover what's happening in Lebanon, the revolution, some might say the vibrant ambience we had back 2 years ago, but now you're based in Istanbul. So how did this affect your line of work, both as a journalist, and how do you think it will impact other lines of work in Lebanon and sectors?
Thank you, Ghida, for this question. It's actually, the irony is that I left Istanbul back to Lebanon around the end of September 2019, and I found myself back in Istanbul 2 years later at around the same time. So initially in 2019, I had left Lebanon to pursue a consultancy in Turkey that was supposed to be temporary, but then I thought maybe I give a life abroad a try, because I've never lived abroad for more than 1 month and a half or 2 months. So I'm a firm believer that my job is to be in Lebanon. I have to be in my country. And then there were wildfires that happened in Lebanon. That was when things started going south in the country, from the wildfires in September, October 2019, and it hasn't stopped until now. Things have been getting worse and worse on every level in the country. So I flew back when the protests were happening, and I started covering the protests, and they reminded me of 2015, of the trash crisis in Lebanon, when we had trash problems, and when we had a movement called the You Stink movement, which in my opinion, as a journalist who also covered it, was one of the biggest protests that Lebanon witnessed after the protests of the 2004, 2005 era and the 2010, 2011 era. So I felt that the people were motivated. It was very inspiring. And I thought, but hey, it might tone down in a few days. 2 weeks later, it was only getting bigger and bigger. So I went back to Turkey, I packed my stuff, and I moved back to Lebanon. And I've been in Lebanon since then. It was possible for me to report from there because the situation economically has been okay. I work with international media, so I have my source of income is relatively good. I don't work with local media, so I don't have this problem of cash flow that usually local reporters suffer from, because so many of the local media don't pay on time and all of that. So as long as I had a fine source of income, but I also had electricity and internet, that was fine for me. Now the explosion happened, and I felt more inclined to stay in Lebanon, because there's no way that I'm gonna leave Lebanon, even if I'm scared at that point. And then there were a series of very weird and tragic assassinations that happened for people who are politically vocal in Lebanon. And I remember that on the day I packed one of my bags and I started pacing at home, telling my parents that, okay, this is it, I'm gonna leave. And then a few hours later, I thought, no, this is not when I leave yet. I still have the basics to stay in Lebanon, so I can report from home. Even if I do get, some threats, some bad messages here and there, I can do it from home. There's no way that I leave now. But then in the summer of 2021, fuel shortage, electricity shortage, internet shortage, no medicine, everything getting much more expensive. You have to make a choice here. I wasn't able to psychologically and physically be present in Lebanon anymore. So I made the rough decision of leaving, because I am not okay in Lebanon. It's not only that I have to report from my house, because whenever someone gets angry on social media, they tend to start, a campaign against me or against other women journalists. Now I also have to cut my working hours and, time them to when I have electricity or generator, when the internet is, when the 4G or the 3G is good, when the Wi-Fi is good. It became very frustrating, and I had to move. And I found myself leaving with many other Lebanese at the time. But somehow this brought a sense of collective grief. It's like whenever I looked around me in the airport, there were people who were leaving for the same reasons. Whenever I look around me online right now, there are Lebanese who are feeling exactly the way I feel and are posting it online. There's this sense of collective grief that people who are leaving are going through, because we also think of our responsibility and of what we left behind. There's also a lot of guilt. It's not easy for journalists to leave a place where they know that they're supposed to be reporting from, but at the same time, if you're not able to produce the work, and if you're not being able to keep the tone as high as you want it to be, then there's a choice to be made. And the other thing is that as journalists, our job is to be based in conflict zones, or in places where things are not going well, where there's civil unrest, where there are protests, where there's war. But this has two sides to it. So first, when you're a foreigner and you have a good passport, this is a privilege, because you can be based anywhere, even as a freelancer. At the end of the day, you know that you have a passport that will get you out of that country. So my passport is not worthy enough, sadly, to be able to protect me as a freelancer. And the other side to it is that I'm an independent freelancer. So there is I don't have CNN or the Washington Post or the New York Times to take me out if I need to, or to support me with the extra internet bandwidth or electricity, or to have an open office where I can report from all the time. So this was one of the choices, but I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones. When I talk about this, I'm one of the lucky people, because I was able to do this, and I managed to do it in a very short period of time. There are so many people in Lebanon that are not able to find a second choice for now. And this also brings in a sense of guilt, which for me keeps me moving forward in my reporting about Lebanon. This is not, the time to be silent or to take a break, even though if we want to talk about the psychology of things, you should take a break, you should, isolate yourself a bit from the news. I am thinking in an opposite way. I'm thinking that now I have the platforms, but I also have the electricity and the internet connection. So I have to keep posting. I have to try and keep people aware. But it's a struggle. This I can say for sure, that it's a struggle to be abroad. It's a struggle to decide to leave your country.
Yes, and I can definitely emphasize on Luna's point, even for someone who is now in Lebanon. And every time Luna was speaking, she was lacking a bit for me, and my heart would just like race because I'm scared that the internet will cut off and I won't be able to continue. But it's so, so important to keep talking about Lebanon. And as you said, we really can't take a break because in the near future, we don't see anything that the government is doing that is going to be stable anytime soon. So it's really up to the citizens, the diaspora, to speak up for what is happening. So Luna spoke a bit about the diaspora, but I'd like to talk how international community has been. So Tiffany, I know she was one of the few who were selected to speak at the Faces event in front of a crowd of almost 5,000 people who are the Stanford class of 2025. So she talked about a very heartfelt speech about the humanitarian crisis that's plaguing Lebanon, which is the topic of our webinar today. So I wanted to ask Tiffany, what was the international response and how did people react when they heard you talk about Lebanon on such in depth?
Yeah, of course. So basically, the crowd that I spoke in front of were all amazing, brilliant students who are very informed about the world. But when you see these students rely a lot on media, and media tends to label politics and humanitarian crisis and social stigmas as trends. So if media does not highlight what's happening, for example, in Lebanon, then these students would not be aware about what's happening in Lebanon. And I think that's a very big problem. The fact that media has the power to label problems like what we're seeing in Lebanon as trends when it's actually the daily bread of the Lebanese people. So there's a few types of reaction that I received, a lot from the local American citizens who, some of them were not aware where Lebanon was in the first place. They did not know that it was in the Middle East. And for them, it was just intriguing. One of them described it for me as a Netflix series, a horror movie, a continuous horror movie about what's happening in Lebanon. I think the most striking thing for them was the journey that like, for example, as a Lebanese student myself, that I made to reach Lebanon, especially that in the beginning of my speech, I talk about the Beirut blast and how with all this destruction around, you have to piece yourself up in order to piece Beirut up, and you have to take the first step to leave your country. Something that people reacted to was the survivor's guilt that I expressed in my speech, saying that being able to survive this explosion and have this new chapter of your life is for me to dedicate this chapter to seek justice and to repeace my country with my fellow citizens. Some of them were really emotional. Some of them had tears in their eyes, and a lot of them reached out to me to know more about Lebanon, how to donate, several organizations to be directed to, and especially they wanted to have more conversations, not to read media. Their interest was not to read news, but to listen to the voice of the people. One concern I had while doing this speech was, being the only Lebanese in my class at Stanford, it's an honor and a blessing, but it's also pressure because you need to carry the name of your country the way it carried you your whole life. Lebanon has given me a place to belong to, has given me a citizenship, an identity, a family, friends. So the way I portray Lebanon is crucial to all of these elements that shape who I am. So I think that it was really nice to see people resonate with what I said, people being more curious about what's happening back home. And also the main goal of this speech was just, to show to the Lebanese people that they are not alone that it doesn't mean that if we left our country that we are not coming back, because the sole motive of leaving Lebanon is to acquire the best education possible, the best perspective possible, the best opportunities to come back and to invest into the country. Because we should never forget where we came from. And we came from Lebanon, and we are coming back to Lebanon.
Thank you. I'd like to extend my question to Gheed, since you are also a student abroad. What was your way of giving back?
Yeah, so I left Lebanon when the crisis was at its peak, and I just wish I could have left Lebanon when it was like in better conditions. I just wish I could have left Lebanon when, when it was like, I left Lebanon with a broken heart. I left Lebanon with open wounds. My last goodbyes were really like heartbreaking, and I just wish I kept like a better picture of Lebanon, because right now I feel like I'm missing a place that no longer exists, because the Lebanon is in my head is not the Lebanon that currently exists right now. So if I go back, I know that I wouldn't find Lebanon the way it used to be. Which is like really hard. But like coming here, I just feel like, I'm living, in a whole other universe, and Stanford has given me something that, I deserve, and something that Lebanon couldn't give me, like the dream, the hope. And it's really stressful being, miles away from home and witnessing all the horrible things happening in Lebanon and not being able to do anything about it except for, posting about it, telling your story, which is the most I can do, but at the same time, the least I can do. So, I last week I wrote an article for the Stanford Daily about being homesick for a country, for a place that no longer exists like before. And I've gotten amazing feedback. I've gotten amazing response. People call me crying, and it was really emotional. And a lot of people also did not know, about Lebanon, not know about what was happening in Lebanon, and how it is, being an immigrant, how it is living far away from home. So it was really important for me to, speak to this audience, to write about it, to talk about it. And as much as I can, I try to, talk to my Stanford friends here, even in classes, every time I say that, I'm the first thing I mention about myself is that I'm Lebanese, because I am proud of my identity. And I want other people to know that. I try as much as possible to portray Lebanon as it is, because as Tiffany said, the media coverage is just inaccurate. It does not cover everything, because the issue is so complicated, and it's rooted in history. And it's incredibly important for the international community to learn about it, and to learn about the injustice, about the robbery, about the hypocrisy, about everything, every crime our government did.
I hope that each of our panelists' stories really inspire you to not be scared to doubt the media, because sometimes it can really be biased or just cover one side of the story, to really reach out to someone who, not saying is Lebanese, but is more familiar in the field and what's going on. So just to wrap up, I have one last question for all of you. The coming elections that is in March 22 is inevitable topic that comes into every debate about Lebanon. So I'd like to hear what are your opinions about it. Some people are optimistic, some people aren't. We can start with Luna. I know you have a very opinionated mind about this. So I'd like to hear your answer, and then we can go to Tiffany and Gheed.
Yes, indeed. I am very opinionated about this and about everything. I probably portray the worst type of journalism that they teach us not to practice in books, but I never lie. I hold myself accountable publicly. Um, I think that we need to talk about impunity before we talk about the elections. But I will give my opinion, my brief opinion about elections. But impunity, as long as no one is being held accountable for their crimes in Lebanon, from the economic crimes, from what happened with the banks, because I'm sorry that we forgot to also mention this to you guys, but basically the banks stole our money and our savings in Lebanon. They banished them, they disappeared, they banned us from getting them. We still don't understand what happened. Some people call it a Ponzi scheme. Some people say that, you know, they gave out a lot of loans from our money, so we're not able to cash them out anymore. Some people say, oh no, it's a lie, the money is still somewhere in the banks, but the central bank is holding the money hostage until it secures more international funding and aid and so on. If I want to talk about impunity, I would start with the banks and the economic sector before anything related to politics, to understand where did the Lebanese money go. Thousands of dollars, families not being able to pay for their sons and daughters' education abroad. I mean, I think that Tiffany and Gheed are the best people to maybe share examples one day about the stories that they hear. I am no longer a student, but I know parents and students who reach out to me personally to tell me how they can no longer pay the tuition abroad. So this is, in my opinion, a crime that is as important as a political crime. As Tiffany was saying about implicit crimes, this is one of them. Where did the money go? You need to implement and practice impunity. When people who screwed this country and its people over are put in jail or are put in front of the judiciary, and excuse my French when I express this, but like, it's honestly, I can't even, I don't know where to start from. Impunity, just if someone is accused, put them in front of the judiciary. Maybe we are wrong about them. Maybe they are amazing politicians and we are being biased. Just, you know, practice the law. So when we see this example in front of us, this is when we will be motivated to go back to the country even, or to go elect. Do you know that there aren't enough people from the diaspora who registered to vote in the 2022 elections? People are even doubting the system of the registration online because this is how tired the Lebanese are. So they don't see an example of change in front of them. While we look at other countries, okay, Europe is not a perfect place. They have refugees crisis and refugees policies. When I look at what the Danish government is doing, I facepalm myself every day, the way they are handling the refugees crisis. The US is definitely not a perfect place. There are a lot of flaws, but I look at the judiciary system and I see a system. Like, I take the small things. I don't want a perfect country. This is how you encourage people to change their country, by starting from one place. So no, the upcoming elections, they will not bring the change, in my opinion, because no one is ready for the elections. The groups or the alternative parties that were formed are still baby parties. They are still growing up and maturing. The movements in the universities, the secular club movements, is stronger and smarter than all of the Thawra or the revolution initiatives put together. If you look at every political initiative that flourished from the revolution, and you look at secular clubs in all of the Lebanese universities and the network they managed to form, these people will be the people who will know how to work in politics, but this needs a few years. I'm afraid that this is not going to be in 2022. However, this doesn't mean that people shouldn't vote. People should take every opportunity to go and vote in the upcoming elections for the closest candidates that they can find. Even those who are lacking some of the morals or some of the basics, voting is your right. You should vote. In the last elections, I voted, but I put down a white paper. I did not write any name, but I practiced my right to vote, but no one represented me. Really, no one represented me in my district. But I went there and I did that. So this is what we should be encouraging people to do. But other than that, there needs to be more work from emerging political parties, and work that goes beyond these narratives of we're doing some campaigns, some social media campaigns, we're working on grassroots initiatives. Like, come on, you go to a rural area, the man that is 70 years old is not going to understand what you're talking about. You know, you need to be stronger. So this is my opinion when it comes to the priorities in Lebanon. Yeah.
Tiffany, go ahead.
So I want to take you on a trip down history. If you look at 1943, 1943 is the year where Lebanon was granted its independence. When the French left, they left Lebanon with a national pact. They said the government, the president can only be Maronite, and the prime minister can only be this, and they just divided the government politically and in a sectarian way. And I think this was a good leeway for one of the main reasons for the civil war. What I want to say here is you have in Lebanon, I think, something I studied called the black box, where you have the box, which is a democratic facade, and then on the inside, obviously, you have Pandora's box, nothing's going right. You have no structural, healthy structure of a government that can succeed. I think what should be happening in Lebanon is something called transitional justice. But in order for transitional justice to happen, you need to have the key elements, which the first key element for transitional justice is accountability and transparency. If you imagine you have a land where you want to plant something, and you have good seeds, but the land in itself is rotten and is not fertile enough. Are you going to get good plants to harvest? No. This is a problem with the elections, in my opinion. I'm not saying that the elections should not happen and people should not vote. By all means, like Luna said, you should practice your democratic right and your right as a citizen. But I think that elections are just 10% of what should be done. I think what should be done first and foremost is in the education sector. I think the education sector and the narratives that are transmitted from generations to generations about how to be a Lebanese citizen, about what it means to have a Lebanese identity, and what it means to be independent from these political parties. I think that the problem in Lebanon is a problem of self-governance. Lebanon, before its creation, was dominated by the Ottoman Empire, by the French. It has never known how to pick its rails on its own and to govern. So I think that that's a main problem, and that's why we rely on regional and international actors and political parties. And what we should look at the government is to what extent are the people in power that will come represent all voices of the Lebanese people. One, because we have this issue of sectarianism and political competition in the government. And number two, because you have a puzzle in the Lebanese government where you have regional actors, to not name, we all know the countries that are involved in Lebanon that are at the backdrop of manipulating the puppets in the government, which are the political leaders. So I think also maybe an unpopular opinion, but that's just, of an 18-year-old, I think the constitution has to change. I think the constitution in Lebanon is filled with loopholes, was written based on colonialism, and I think that it gives a lot of leeway for the political parties to practice their crimes and just shovel them under, oh yeah, it's under this law, under that law, and protect them. I think it's giving them a lot of immunity. I think what should change is not only the election, is education sectors, the mentality of the people. That's why the revolution failed anyways. And also for sure, the constitution, because we need to destroy the structure, the core. We need this destruction. The destruction that's happening in Lebanon is painful, but it's a destruction that's inevitable. This destruction must happen. People must wake up, because at the end of the day, people voted for the mafia lords and militia lords that are in power, are not in power just by mistake. People voted for them. We need to know better. We need to hit rock bottom in order to stand up again. And we need this system to get destroyed, because we need to rebuild it from scratch, not from the pieces of the broken system, but from the new generation that will represent the voices of the Lebanese people, to not embody a democratic facade, but to embody a democratic system.
Definitely, I think what Tiffany said, especially the metaphor she used about the land initially being infertile and not be able to be planted on, is so true. Gheed, we'll be moving on to you.
Yes. So do I think there is hope? Personally, I don't think there's hope because, as it has already been mentioned, the whole political system needs to be refixed. It's not just an issue of elections; it's an issue of, the whole political system. Who the people who, the people in our government, who are they representing? Because they're not representing us. And I think why some people, or why is there like a glimpse of hope, is because mostly people are counting on expats because they are supposed to have, broken free from confessionalism or from this mentality, but nothing is really guaranteed. Because the mentality of, being politically affiliated and following your political leader still is very common right now. And every time a political issue arises, like last time the Beirut clash, we become divided again, like in times of war. And Beirut last like 2 weeks ago, maybe it turned into a war zone. And each person just went on a different road. Each person followed his leader, and no one really remembered peace. No one remembered what unites us, and we just became divided again. And when there are many people who are still following, like blindly following their political leaders, when they're allowing their political leaders to brainwash them, to manipulate them into voting for them, then they're going to maintain their power, and they're going to reign through terror. And it's also important to mention that eligible voters have to be above 21 years old. So one important thing is maybe to lower it to 18, because the people who have the potential to be, agents for change are the young generation, and most of them cannot vote. And so it's really important for them to make their voices heard. And yeah, I just really want to encourage everyone who can vote to go ahead and vote, because it's their right, and because we have to make ourselves heard.
I already know that our panelists would want to say more. There's only so much to cover. We already went a bit overboard. We wanted to talk about foreign aid, international politics, the foreign powers that control Lebanon, such as Iran, but the educational process will not stop here. I promise you, we will be sending a link in the chat at the end with so much resources, which we will be continuing to update after the webinar, with everything else you need to know. So I just wanted to ask if we would like to open the panel up for discussion, but we will be only entertaining a couple of questions because we don't want to take out of everyone's time. We know you have your lives to get back to. So thank you everyone for coming. Does anyone have any questions? Please raise your hand and we will try to accommodate as much as we can. Thank you, Nathalie. Okay, yes, girl.
Okay, so I think, most of the audience here is from the United States. So I'm wondering, from a perspective of someone in the United States, what can we do to kind of help the crisis, and what can our government do to help Lebanon? Okay,
so I don't know who to pick. Okay, if you guys, I want all of your voices to be heard. So if Luna, Tiffany, and Gheed, by that order, can speak just a bit, a few sentences to answer his questions. Luna, you can start.
All right, I'll be quick. I think that the main thing that the US government can do, and this is something that I've been posting and I've been questioning, is to stop recognizing Lebanese politicians. As US citizens, of course, what you can do is that what you're doing now, panels, sharing, talking about Lebanon, informing everyone. This is great, but there's only so much that you can do, right? It's not your job to fix other countries. So the support is amazing, but diplomatic missions have been giving validation for Lebanese politicians for months. Especially recently, I've been surprised by the US diplomats who have been visiting Lebanese officials in times of the clashes. Right when the clashes were happening, there was a US-led mission that was sitting down with the Speaker of the Parliament, Nabih Berri. So to me, we need to stop this validation. I'm not encouraging sanctions. Sanctions are a completely different topic that we can discuss for hours, but the validation, you need to start picking who you validate as a government. And in my opinion, they are validating corrupt Lebanese politicians way too much.
Yeah, I second what Luna said. To be very quick, I think that something that worries me is the amount of proverbial things that the US can say in their speeches, but not actually apply them because of regional kind of strategies that they have. I think that what I'm worried about is the extent to which them supporting or listening or even conspiring with the political parties, not with the people, because there's a difference to understand that the political parties and the people in power do not represent Lebanon. Also, just one last thing to keep in mind, after the blast and currently the aids that are being sent in Lebanon, the Lebanese people have no choice. They have to accept these aids because they are in positions of distress, but these aids are just short-term benefits for Lebanon. We should know that on the long term, I think that these important regional international powers might come back for more from Lebanon, and Lebanon cannot tolerate more. So I'm just worried about this intervention of the US implicitly through regional actors, or the US just literally in the country.
Yes, so I agree with Tiffany and Luna, and I also want to say that, as American citizens, if you can ask questions, ask them. If you can donate, donate, and most importantly, educate yourself. And because also don't look into the media, because most of the time it's not accurate and it does not represent what's really happening in Lebanon, because the issue is much more complicated. So just like even being here and listening to us and listening to people who have been there, who have experienced the revolution, the Beirut blast, the Beirut clash, and everything, it's really important. So just keep on asking questions, keep on reading, keep on educating yourself. It's really important.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay, so I think with that, I will wrap up this meeting. And I just wanted to say that although I am Lebanese, I have been engaged in so many so many talks about this. Maybe I've heard all of your answers, not all of them, but I just want to say that we can really never have enough talks about this. Discourse is imperative for change. I think, as Gheed said, being educated about these and informed and acquiring all types of knowledge that you can is very important. So thank you so much again for all our brilliant panelists. I'm so honored to have been your host today. Yes, Nathalie.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to add something, because I was mesmerized by your enthusiasm and your articulate thoughts. I did want to apologize on behalf of Manal. She had a family memorial, so she could not be here today, because I realized that it was my role to shut up while you were all speaking about Lebanon, but she would have joined all your voices. So I just wanted to add that, and I do recognize her in all the people who've spoken today. She shares the same enthusiasm and faith and resilience, and I just put in the chat I do think that there's no shortage of human energy in Lebanon. So you guys have a reason to be hopeful. So on that note, thank you again for your invitation and for noticing our program and for supporting. It's important. I will add one on the practical actions. I will just add one thing. One of the things that we're keen on doing is to create supply chains that are sustainable with local suppliers. So to answer Graham's question, those are the kind of, it may seem small, but it does have an impact on people's lives on the ground. So thank you again, and yeah, keep going. We'll definitely be in touch.
Thank you. And about what Nathalie said about she can see Manal's resilience and intelligence, I think this applies, and it really warms my heart to say this to all Lebanese people, especially women, as you can see. So thank you again. We put a resources link, which I said we will be updated in like 30 minutes. We will be updating the resources if you'd like to check it out. And please, if you can fill the satisfaction link, what did you guys think about this webinar? If you would like us to talk more specifically about Lebanon, everything you have in mind, please say it. Thank you all so much for coming. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.